Explosions have recently been reported near the Bushehr nuclear plant and warnings issued over sites near Natanz and Pickaxe Mountain.
President Donald Trump found he wasn't getting very far and he wanted an exit.
We cannot let them ever even think about having a nuclear weapon, and that's exactly what's happening. They'll never have a nuclear weapon.
So where does the Iranian nuclear program really stand today?
He finds it tough to accept a win, then how could he accept a win-lose where he was the loser?
If we left today, it would take them decades to rebuild, and I don't believe they could ever rebuild.
Deliberately attacking civilian infrastructure is seen as a war crime. But this time they're making no bones about it. They're claiming that this is what they will do. One was the uranium enrichment centrifuges which were located underground. Second was the enriched uranium, about 400 plus kilos of 60% enriched uranium. And where was it stored?
What is your take really on JCPOA and Donald Trump's current claims, the rhetoric versus the substance?
When he issued his fatwa was intended as much for the Iranian people, Iranian opinion makers, as for the external world.
The Omani foreign minister was constantly saying that we are going to get a good deal, do not strike.
And if the hardliners are more inclined to move forward with the nuclear program towards weaponization, then perhaps they will do so.
If I were Mujtaba Khamenei, wouldn't I now have greater reasons to actually accelerate on an Iranian nuclear program?
There are only 4 countries that are outside the NPT today, which is India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. All 4 have nuclear weapons.
You suddenly see the US energy minister sign on to a nuclear deal with the Saudis virtually, and less than 24 hours after its signing, Donald Trump upends the nuclear deal. Does the nuclear deterrence theory still work? Hello and a warm welcome to another edition of the Foreign Policy Dialogue, our weekly deep dive conversation series on issues of global relevance and importance. And we focus once again on the Iran-US war in this episode, but we talk about a very specific issue. One that was perhaps supposed to be the original goalpost, but that seems to have shifted. The Iranian nuclear program. Of course, as we record this podcast here today, this Friday, and you get to hear this conversation on Sunday, there are rapid developments taking place. While the United States has targeted Iranian military infrastructure, it has threatened underground nuclear enrichment sites. Amid the renewed escalation, there are also vessels that are getting attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. Explosions have recently been reported near the Bushehr nuclear plant and warnings issued over sites near Natanz and Pickaxe Mountain. So where does the Iranian nuclear program really stand today? How do we look at it from the past context of the nuclear agreement that was something that Donald Trump later on, in fact, walked out of? To understand all of these issues, I'm joined here by somebody who really understands the nuances and the nuts and the bolts of the story very well, Ambassador Rakesh Sood, a former Indian diplomat. He's also a prolific writer, columnist. He also served as Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's special envoy for disarmament and non-proliferation, and is currently also involved with the prominent think tank CSTR. Ambassador Sood, many thanks for joining us here.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
I know that things change very rapidly here, particularly in West Asia. And between now, 24th of July to 26th of July, a lot of things could have changed. But your assessment right now of, as you see this military escalation resumption, how intense do you find it compared to the start of the war on 28th of February?
I think what has happened is that President Donald Trump found, after a few days, or stage 1, shall we say, of the war, that he wasn't getting very far and he wanted an exit. So we saw a ceasefire, we saw the 14-point MOU, that was signed and announced, and we saw some talks taking place. We also saw some efforts by President Trump to kind of keep Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel completely out of this process of talks that were being brokered in Oman, in Doha, and so on, by Pakistan, by Egypt, by the Omanis, by the Qataris, and so on. But somewhere along the way, it was quite clear that there was a certain amount of a backlash to what was the 14-point MOU all about? Because the 14-point MOU focused up front on reopening of the Hormuz, and the point regarding the nuclear program, which had been one of the original points for which the war had been undertaken by Israel and the United States. That was one point on which negotiations were going to begin and would take place after 60 days. Meanwhile, of course, there was a certain amount of Iranian financial resources which had been seized, which would be then released gradually, and so on. And this led to a certain backlash, both privately from Prime Minister Netanyahu, from parts of President Donald Trump's vote base. And I think he then probably felt that this may not go down very well in his midterms. So, somewhat, in a sense, pushed into a corner. Now, mind you, the Iranians did not make it easy, also. I mean, to be fair to President Trump, the Iranians can be tough negotiators. They can be very frustrating negotiators also. And they didn't make it easy because they kept harping on the fact that they had won this round, and the whole general media all around was that Iran had scored a victory in this vis-a-vis the United States. There were comparisons being made that just as Ukraine had done very well vis-a-vis Russia, one superpower, military superpower, similarly Iran, which was a small country, had done very well against the joint military might of the regional superpower, namely Israel, together with the global superpower, namely the United States. And so the Iranian leadership came out quite strongly on that side, including their negotiator, the mayor of Tehran, Khalibaf.
Right.
And now that did not obviously go down very well because Mr. Trump does not look at a negotiation as a win-win outcome. He looks at a negotiation as something in which he wins and the other side loses. Now, the perception that was being created was that here was a negotiation in which he was actually the loser. It wasn't even a win-win. I mean, he finds it tough to accept a win-win. How could he accept a win-lose where he was the loser? And so he went back into the conflict, which is not necessarily a conflict. I mean, in a sense, if he was persuaded to go into the conflict in stage one, I think this time he just got pushed into the conflict in stage two. And that's what has happened. And meanwhile, of course,
So, you
the
mentioned
focus has been on the Hormuz. I mean, the focus is there's very little focus on Iran's nuclear program and what are the negotiations, except that President Trump is insisting, as is his Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, that this time they are going to hit out at the bridges, at the Iranian power plants, at the civilian infrastructure without batting an eyelid. I mean, at least the first time they were at least saying that, because, deliberately attacking civilian infrastructure is seen as a war crime. But this time they're making no bones about it. They're claiming that this is what they will do directly.
Right. So before I progress, can you just talking about the nuclear, issue now? I want to hear from you and make our viewers understand what really happened last June. I mean, June of 2025, not this June, when the White House actually posted and claimed that it had obliterated Iranian nuclear facilities, perhaps the nuclear program. What really played out then before I talk about what was being discussed before the war began this February?
Well, last year what had happened was that there was a fair amount of intelligence, and the focus was on the nuclear program. And the idea was that if the US and Israel together could decimate, obliterate, as was claimed, although that was a claim that was made by President Donald Trump, it was not necessarily a claim that was supported by his own director of national intelligence, former director of national intelligence, who since left her job, Tutsi Gabbard. So the overall intelligence assessment, because the office of the DNI does an overall assessment of the intelligence that is received from different agencies, different sources, monitor satellite imagery, etc., etc. And they did not support this conclusion of quote unquote obliteration, which was the word that had been used by President Donald Trump. However, it was pretty badly damaged. There is no two ways about it, because even the Iranians said that it would take them time to reconstitute it. But whether it had been totally done away with is a very difficult judgment to make, because nobody has had access to those sites, no outsider. The International Atomic Energy Agency or any other nuclear experts, nobody has had access to that site. So what we have is whatever are the opinions of different people based on their hearsay.
Right. So then when Donald Trump continues to, threaten right now that we will strike the sites near Natanz, near Pickaxe Mountain, what could be the significance and the possible implication of these fresh warnings at this point, sir?
Well, see, there were a couple of things about the nuclear program. One was the uranium enrichment centrifuges, which were located underground. The second was the enriched uranium, about 400 plus kilos of 60% enriched uranium. And where was it stored? Now, nobody really knows whether it was underground, whether it had been taken away to another location, or etc. So but the fact is that the new centrifuge facility was deep underground in what is called the Pickaxe Mountain. And people felt that perhaps while the entrance to those sites, to those underground facilities, had been sufficiently bombed and they had been blocked, as it were, but nobody really knew what had happened inside, whether the electricity systems, whether the power generation systems, whether the centrifuges. After all, these are sensitive pieces of equipment, and when you drop these heavy 2,000-ton kind of bombs on those, you don't know what the vibrations are, what the shock waves are, how it is going to impact the equipment, how it is going to impact the centrifuges. It's quite possible that the centrifuges had been turned off, in which case the impact should have been less. But then nobody really knows this, because nobody has been inside. And the entrances to those places have been, because these have been bombed, so there is tons and tons of rubble at these entrances. So frankly, it is unclear as to even if the Iranians have been able to find a way in. Perhaps they had another entrance, which was a secret entrance, which nobody really knows about. I don't know, and I don't know. The Americans may think that there may have been something. The Iranians may have found a way inside. Maybe the Israelis have some intelligence, but all of this is entire speculation. But since now President Donald Trump is having a tough time finding justification as to why he went to a 14-point MOU and why he is backing away from it and why he is resuming bombing. So perhaps he feels that the best way to justify it is to target nuclear facilities and nuclear sites. And he is even talking of, therefore, going after the Bushehr nuclear power plant, which is a fully safeguarded nuclear facility.
So, which then brings me to the question that Donald Trump is the American president who walked out of the JCPOA, which was finalized after years of negotiations with the P5+1. It allowed for the monitoring and supervision of the IAEA. Iran, unlike India, unlike other players, is actually a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But Donald Trump keeps on harping that the JCPOA was a sellout under Obama, that he's going to hammer out a far better agreement, particularly to ensure that Iran does not develop nuclear programs. What is your take really on JCPOA and Donald Trump's current claims, the rhetoric versus the substance?
Well, the fact is that President Donald Trump in his election campaign had said that the JCPOA is a terrible agreement. In fact, that was the phrase he used. So what he did was that 2 years after coming into power, by 2018, a year and a half actually after he took over, he prepared the ground for the US to walk out of the JCPOA. The JCPOA, by the way, was part of international law because it had been endorsed by the UN Security Council. All members of the UN Security Council had approved it. So to the extent that it enjoyed international legal status, that's about the maximum that you can get. Because here is a treaty that enjoys universal endorsement by that element or by that organization of the United Nations, which has legal authoritative power, something which the UN General Assembly does not. So from that point of view, it was international law. But everybody, expressed regret that that US had unilaterally walked out of it because it was based on an intrusive verification, and the intrusive verification by the IAEA, which was giving quarterly reports. Each and every report of the IAEA had said that Iran was fully compliant with its obligations under the JCPOA. It had cooperated, it had been transparent about it, about the facilities, about the stockpiles, etc., etc. So there had been Iran was not accused of any violation. President Trump walked out of it because he felt that it was a bad agreement. As simple as that. And so therefore, now how does he get into something that is supposed to be a better agreement than the JCPOA? That is a challenge, because the 14-point MOU, which was the closest that we came to any negotiated outcome so far last month, was that this would lead to something which would, if it could be as good as the JCPOA, we would be lucky. I mean, that was the general assessment.
But in between these two, there was also the talks that were happening before 20th of February in Geneva again, where Syed Abbas Araghchi was there. The Omani foreign minister was constantly saying that we are going to get a good deal, do not strike. Do you really think the Iranians were willing to offer more than they had offered in JCPOA when the February talks were happening, particularly on the nuclear issue?
Well, there was one additional element that had come in, because after the US walked out of the JCPOA. For 1 year, the Iranians continued to observe their obligations under the JCPOA for 1 full year, because the Europeans, the EU, and the E3 had said, please observe your obligations. We will try and find a way around the US sanctions. Because when President Trump walked out of the JCPOA, over a period of time, the sanctions on export of Iranian crude kicked in, which meant that there had to be a workaround the dollar denomination of the crude trade. And the Europeans said that we'll try and find a way around it. They created some kind of a complicated mechanism called Instex, which didn't really cut much ice. And nobody was buying into that. And it is after 1 year that finally the Iranians said, all right, they resumed their enrichment. They started activating their advanced centrifuges. They went beyond the 3.67% enrichment that they had committed to observe earlier, going up to 60%. And they kept announcing it to the rest of the world. And then they threw out the IAEA inspectors. They said that we are not going to open ourselves up to any more inspections. So yes, there were new factors. And by that time, the IAEA had estimated that there was over 400 kilos of 60% enriched uranium. So these were some of the new factors that were going to have to be negotiated for any new agreement, and which is what Foreign Minister Aragchi, and with the intermediation of the Omanis and so on, was negotiating with the American Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So these were the new elements,
Right.
other than
So-
how to bring these back, how to bring the Iranians back.
But then between 20th February to now 24th of July, if I were Iran, if I were Mujtaba Khamenei, wouldn't I now have greater reasons to actually accelerate on an Iranian nuclear program, given the strikes killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the same man who between 2001 to 2003 was constantly telling the world, giving it a theological perspective, that under Islam, it does not allow for us to develop nuclear weapons, that we are only wanting uranium for civil nuclear purposes. And since then to now, you have a much more hardline IRGC, and Iran, which has been attacked constantly. Wouldn't they have greater reasons to not return to the nuclear negotiations and instead pedal fast the program now?
Yes, I would tend to think so, because you see, in Iran, there were two schools of thought about how to go about the nuclear program. And when in 2003, when the then Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, Mujtaba's father, when he issued his fatwa was intended as much for the Iranian people, Iranian opinion makers, as for the external world. It was to say that this is the final word, and now the debate shall end. So it was a message for the domestic voices which wanted to move forward with the program, to say no, this is not considered to be sanctified by our religion, Islam, and so therefore we will not have a bomb. We can have a capability as is permitted to us, which includes enrichment and so on. Now, so his intent was also to quell any domestic opposition. Now, with his assassination, with his murder, frankly, that fatwa is rendered null and void, because nobody then, his son has not come out with a similar fatwa. The new Supreme Leader has not come out with the fatwa against nuclear weapons. So if that fatwa has to be renewed, somebody has to take that. And the fact is, therefore, that we, as you yourself said, that the hardliners of the IRGC seem to have, we can only judge it, seem to have the upper hand in today's Iran. And if the hardliners are more inclined to move forward with the nuclear program towards weaponization, then perhaps they will do so.
Right. So then just the last few questions. I was speaking to the former foreign minister, Mr. Salman Khurshid, and who emphasized on the fact that, look, the world keeps talking about the Iranian nuclear program, but there is Israel, which actually already has nuclear weapons in the region. So India also, at the end of the day, went ahead and developed its nuclear program despite all resistance. So, what gives the world a right to say no to Iran when people have also seen the fate of what has really happened, be it with Libya and others? And then you also have a Kim Jong Un, that people, he's a madman, but people try and not sort of play around or simply go ahead and attack him because of the nuclear factor.
Well, you're right when you say what gives the world the right, except that a major part of the world agreed that the less the number of countries that have nuclear weapons, the safer we all are. That, right or wrong, that is a conviction that has been upheld by a number of countries, because there are 191 countries that have signed on to the NPT. There are only 4 countries that are outside the NPT today, which is India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. And all 4 have nuclear weapons. And so therefore they cannot even join the NPT as it currently stands, because the NPT only recognizes those countries as nuclear weapon states that have become nuclear weapon states or that have carried out a nuclear weapons test before 1 January 1967. Now, you can question that why this, what is so sacred about this date? What makes this date special? Nothing makes this date special, because but at the time when the NPT was concluded and opened for signature, it was 1968. So they just took a convenient date of 1 January 67. Now, so how then do you take these 4 countries that are outside the NPT to join the NPT? Either you change the NPT so that these countries, their nuclear weapons can be made acceptable, or all these 4 countries have to decide that they will give up their nuclear weapons unilaterally and then join as non-nuclear weapon states. Now, neither looks very likely at this stage. So in a sense, but that doesn't take away from the fact that 191 countries do support or have supported the idea of non-proliferation as a greater global good. Now, the fact that India or Israel or Pakistan or North Korea felt compelled for their own national reasons to develop nuclear weapons, it's a separate issue. And they did so. And of these 4, it is only India which has gained a degree of acceptance because of the fact that we have a special waiver from the IAEA which came in 2008 after nearly 15 years of conversations and 10 years of negotiations after the nuclear tests of 1998, that enabled us to at least go back and have civilian nuclear cooperation, something with other countries, something which none of the other 3 have.
Right.
So in that sense, there is a growing acceptance. However, at the same time, many of the countries today which are within the NPT are questioning their decision. And that is evident in Japan, that is evident in South Korea, That is evident in Poland, it is evident in Germany, it is evident in Iran. And even for that matter, in Saudi Arabia, because the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has said on record that if Iran goes nuclear, Saudi Arabia will certainly follow. So, therefore,
And where we have seen that strange event happen, because on a Wednesday this week, you suddenly see the US energy minister sign on to a nuclear deal with the Saudis virtually, and less than 24 hours after its signing, Donald Trump upends the nuclear deal. So what's really is happening there? And he makes it conditional to the Saudis actually signing the Abraham Accords. If it does get signed, how does it change the entire dynamics in the region, sir, if Saudi starts to get a nuclear deal?
my guess is it is the Jewish lobby that forced President Donald Trump to backtrack on it and add on this new conditionality of the Abraham Accords because it was nowhere under consideration. And from the beginning, for since the last more than the last 12 months, since the time that the US Saudi nuclear cooperation agreement has been under negotiation, the Saudis have made it clear that they want the right to enrichment. They wanted the same right to enrichment that Iran claims it has under the NPT. And Saudis are also members of the NPT. So their argument is that we will have the same right. Now, the fact is that the US in its Atomic Energy Act does not countenance assisting or permitting other countries to get the right to enrichment. And in fact, in 2009, when they signed their nuclear cooperation agreement with the UAE, which is the only other country in the region with which they had this agreement, they made it clear, and there is a very clear sentence to the effect that the UAE renounces its right to enrichment. Second, the UAE renounces its right to reprocessing of spent fuel. Now, these two provisions have been taken out by the Saudis. In fact, it has led to questioning in South Korea because today, even the South Koreans are not allowed, and South Korea, mind you, has more than 24 nuclear power reactors, has a very advanced nuclear industry. And they are not allowed to either enrich or reprocess spent fuel. So they are questioning that what was this agreement about. So had this enrichment taken place in one country, it could have opened the gates for justified Iranians to claim their right to enrichment. And maybe even UAE could have questioned it. And that would have made the Israelis very, very nervous. So my guess is that they completely decided, there's obviously, I have no proof for this, but I do think that it was something, the speed with which President Donald Trump backtracked and tagged on a new requirement, it could only be explained by intense amount of pressure from the Jewish lobby and from Israel.
Okay, so that brings me to the final question. In conclusion, sir, every time you have a conflict making it to the headlines, whether it is the current dynamics in the Russia-Ukraine war, whether it is West Asia, whether it was India and Pakistan last year during Operation Sindoor, the big question that is always asked is how close are we to a real nuclear war? And is that a possibility that you see right now? Is that a real threat that you see right now? Or does the nuclear deterrence theory still work?
Well, we have seen deterrence largely in two kind of situations. One is when the two superpowers, which was the US and the Soviet Union, were more or less matched in terms of what they had, in terms of their nuclear arsenals, number one. Number two, they were separated from each other by a continent and an ocean. Number three, the two of them did not have any territorial disputes with each other. They were fighting an ideological war for global supremacy, so to say. between capitalism and communism. The second stage of deterrence that we saw was when the US emerged in a unipolar moment after the breakup of the Soviet Union, which is basically 1991. Both these eras are over. The US itself, for the last 9 years, has talked about facing two near peer nuclear rivals. And the US does not know how to work out its deterrence equations in this. So therefore, we don't know how nuclear deterrence is going to play out, because the stakes of different adversaries could be very different. Take the case of Taiwan. China looks at Taiwan as an integral part of its territory. It's something that it needs. It says that reunification is part of our destiny. Now, the US does not even have a military alliance with Taiwan, but has said that they would enable Taiwan to resist forcible reunification. I mean, so what would be the stake of the US in, let us say, in a confrontation over Taiwan? Would they be equivalent to those of China? Maybe, maybe not. That is also a question that is being asked increasingly in Japan and in South Korea, as I mentioned. And
Right.
therefore, to answer your question, if we have seen since 1945 till now, which is 81 years, and we have not seen any use of nuclear weapons after 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Frankly, I think that in the next 80 years, we will certainly see the use of nuclear weapons.
Good
That's a
Lord.
big prospect.
Well, in the next 8 years, I'm surely not surviving. So, but good luck for the world. It's depressing and a gloomy note to end the conversation with for our future generations. And even on the Taiwan, US military support, I think that ambiguity kind of increased post that Donald Trump's meeting with Xi Jinping in Beijing. But thank you so much, sir. Always enlightening to listen into your perspectives. And before you end the conversation, what is it that you're reading currently? Is there any interesting movie or a book that you would like to recommend to our audience?
Well, I think there is so much happening in terms of the world that much as I would like to read much more fiction, it becomes a little difficult and distracting. And the news channels provide as much speculative entertainment as Netflix.
I am somebody who constantly argues that please stop watching news channels for entertainment. Go watch MTV, Sony, but do not watch news channels. So, but thank you so much, sir. Appreciate you joining me here in this conversation. And to
Thank
all
you.
the viewers who tuned in, if you liked the episode, do share, subscribe to the channel, press the bell icon notification for fresh video alerts. That's all with us here. We'll be back soon with another episode. Goodbye and take care.